If my books ever were only ebooks, I can't imagine being satisfied with that. You know, I love the physical copy. It's the physical book. It's about having made something, and then the idea that I have invented stuff in my head. It's gone on the page, it's gone across the world, and someone else has read it and now it's in their head. That is just still extraordinary to me.
Welcome to Shop Talk with Writers, the podcast where we are very curious about the stories behind the books. I'm Elena Lappin, and my wonderful guest today is British novelist Claire Fuller. She is the award-winning author of several novels, including Our Endless Numbered Days, Swimming Lessons, and Bitter Orange. Her new novel is Hunger and Thirst. Claire Fuller was an artist and sculptor before she published her first novel at the age of 40. In Hunger and Thirst, the main protagonist is also a sculptor, and there's a mysterious link between how she perceives her world and her art. Here's Claire Fuller reading from her new novel, Hunger and Thirst. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Claire Fuller, the author of Hunger and Thirst, and I'm going to read a short bit, it's not from the beginning, so you need to know a little bit about it, which is that it's from the point of view of Ursula, who's looking back to when she was 16 in 1987. She becomes, much later, a famous and reclusive sculptor. And this bit is about a piece of sculpture that she makes. The piece of work that made me famous, in the art world at least, wasn't a drawing. I was 35 when my sculpture, the lithopedian, won the Albrecht Rosen Art Prize, but by then I'd changed my name to Ushy and refused to give interviews or have my photograph taken. As well as providing a life-changing amount of money, the prize arranged for the winner's work to be shown in various prestigious galleries, and I flew to New York to see the sculpture temporarily installed at MoMA. Imagine a single visitor. It's 10 minutes until the museum closes and the place is emptying, and the visitor thinks, one last room. She pushes against the flow, hoping an attendant won't ask her to leave. Her feet ache from the walking, and her brain is tired from the looking, but she comes upon a large room labelled the lithopedian and goes in. The walls are white, the floor is white, the ceiling is white, although it's artfully lit by spotlights that the room's corners are in shadow. A large object on a low plinth is spread out in the middle of the space. The visitor can't make out what it is, but the colour is a reddish-brown, and the object is long, and she's approaching it from one end so that its shape is foreshortened. As she walks forward, it becomes clear that it is an enormous animal lying on its back, perhaps rolling playfully, and she realises it is an animal made from carved wood, gleaming where it has been oiled and polished, as though 1,000 human hands have stroked its head and the point of its nose. She walks further into the space and understands that the animal is a bear, a massive, supine grizzly. When she looks at its face, the eyes seem to look back at her with pain and pleading, appealing to her only, directly, following her as she walks. And with a start, she realises that these eyes are blue, when surely a bear's eyes are brown, and with turquoise irises, black pupils and white sclera. A human's eyes. One more step and she sees the bear's open mouth and teeth, and again something is wrong. The earth sign incisors, top and bottom, are missing. These teeth are all a similar size, yellowish and wonky, English teeth rather than American, with their tidy dental work. But human, yes, she's certain. The visitor approaches closer now and she sees how the head rears back, and the angle of the neck, and that the 4 giant limbs are splayed, and suddenly everything is shockingly on show. The belly slit up the middle, the fur and epidermis peeled back, all rich brown polished wood. The underlayer, the dermis, is also open, revealing in the cavity of the creature's pelvis a woman carved from stone. She is snugly curled on her side, breasts pressed against thighs, head tucked, the glimpse of a vulva, an adult fetus. I carved the bear from the trunk of a 600-year-old yew tree that was cut down in Gloucestershire to make way for a housing estate. Yew is a beautiful wood to work, dense but flexible, and naturally a rich reddish brown. The woman I carved from limestone that I sourced from a Portland quarry in return for a bottle of whisky. When the piece had done the rounds, I had it moved to the middle of a remote Welsh forest, owned by someone Claudia, the gallerist who represents me, knew, and I have let it decay. Every year or so I visit to take photographs of its reintegration into the earth. One day, long after I'm gone, if I'm ever gone, only the curled stone woman will remain.
Claire Fuller, thank you so much. I was wondering, why did you think that this particular bit was actually a good introduction to Hunger and Thirst, this novel?
Well, firstly, it does stand alone, and it is sometimes quite hard to find a reading in a novel that is kind of self-contained and has some movement of its own, ends at a point that doesn't need, too much explanation, or maybe makes the reader want to know on because there's all sorts of questions raised. So there aren't often, certainly in my novels, that many readings that work in that way. So that's why for me it works on one kind of scale, but also I think it does bring up lots of things that this novel is about. So Ursula, as I said, becomes a reclusive and famous sculptor. So here we see a piece of her work and we understand why she's become famous, why it's been successful. And we perhaps start to see the kind of work that she makes, that she is a wood carver. She's also does some stone carving. And you might not know this from this piece, but it brings out all sorts of themes that I think the novel has. So some kind of feralness, some kind of wild children idea. There is the lithopedian is a kind of medical issue that is quite rare, but some women following an ectopic pregnancy, the fetus remains inside them and becomes calcified and is often there for many, many years until some random scan discovers it. And one of the minor characters in Hunger and Thirst has that condition. And so hence the kind of stone adult inside this bear. But Ursula, when she works as an adult, the art she makes repeats and repeats and repeats the same kinds of themes, the same issues that she faced when she was 16 back in 1987. So it kind of works in those ways. And then there's just that little line that says, "When I'm gone, if I'm ever gone." So that kind of line hopefully makes people go,
I'm actually fascinated by that little bit, because I was going to ask you, did you immediately write "if I'm ever gone"? And what did you mean by that?
No, it was put in there as I wrote it. It didn't come later. And it's hard without giving spoilers, but this is her looking back. So we have some present day moments when she's thinking about everything that's happening and she's hiding away in her flat and she's scared that something is coming for her or someone is coming for her. And she has gone through some kind of quite horrific scenes, dead people coming alive and not being dead anymore. And so she feels that this is coming for her, and therefore it might kind of possess her, infect her, whatever it is that happens. So she might never die either.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is a thread that goes through perhaps all or many of your novels, it's something that appears to be quite ordinary, but is actually completely not, and almost paranormal, or, you really have to step out of the ordinary to absorb what you're writing about as a reader, and presumably for yourself as the author. And so my first sort of curiosity is about, where does that happen for you? Which part of your mind? Because you are very visual. You were originally a sculptor, and I believe this is the first novel where you are actually writing from the perspective of someone who is an artist and a sculptor. There is something extremely visual about the way you describe reality. It's very precise. It's very instantly imaginable. But then I wonder, when you look at things, what do you actually see, Claire? Because I just had a manicure, and I was thinking, I wouldn't like to be having a manicure done by Claire Fuller, because she would see things in those hands and in this person that I wouldn't want her to see. I think you see a hell of a lot of stuff that people may want to be hiding from you.
No, I think I do see the world like that, and I am observant, and I am always looking at stuff, and even kind of inventing metaphors in my head for something that I'm just casually looking at. But it is really hard to differentiate myself from any other writer. I do read novels, other people's novels, that I still really enjoy, but perhaps aren't that visual. But I can only talk about the kind of writer that I am, and I only know my own brain. I've never been inside someone else's head, so I don't know what it's like. But for me, that's how I see the world, and that's how it comes out on the page.
Well, if I were to describe what occurs in this novel, it would be something that inhabits the world in Hamlet between enter ghost and exit ghost. That place where conceptually, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, everything is possible. You just have to open the door to it and see it. And you draw so much, you reference actually specific horror movies. Can you name a few that were particularly important to you as a reference?
Yeah, I think this novel, I like that enter ghost and exit ghost and anything can happen in between. That is such a great summing up. And it also can be read by someone who really believes and someone who is completely skeptical, and can be, taken either way. And the characters, Ursula and her friend Sue and Sue's brother Raymond, are all seriously into horror films. And there's kind of three in particular that, they're films that I love, but also work with this novel in various ways. But they are Rosemary's Baby, The Shining, and The Stepford Wives. Mm-hmm. So the book is mostly set in 1987, but so some of these films are quite old, even for a book at the time period of 1987. I think The Shining came out in 1980, and the others were early 70s, late 60s. And so the characters watch these a lot, but I think in the way that the novel is mostly, I hope, kind of character driven, and the build up to the awful things that happen, the scary things, is very slow, is very kind of psychological. And I think those three films work very much in the same way. And they also kind of look at domestic horror in various ways, so in the way that the novel does as well.
I have a personal sort of take on horror movies, which is kind of like a little backstory. So I once applied to film school, and part of that application was an interview, personal interview. And the question was, why do you want to study film? And I said, I was very, very young at the time. And I said, because I am petrified of watching horror movies. So I thought, if I study film and I see how they're made, I will get rid of that fear. Well, I don't think they were particularly impressed. I did get in, but they didn't really care about that. I started the degree, and for the first 6 months, they made us watch Rosemary's Baby every single week. And every single week, we had to watch and rewatch and analyze and discuss and take it apart. And by the time we were done with Rosemary's Baby, I had lost none of my fear of watching it. So that that didn't help me at all. But let's talk about your characters and their obsession with horror films as a kind of comfort. You really go into why they watch them, what it does for them, and perhaps this is a good way to introduce your characters. So we have the main one, Ursula, who is, how would you describe Ursula?
She was brought up in care. She is looking for a family. She's looking to belong. She, for most of the novel, is kind of very easily led, quite naive, but also some kind of independence. She's somebody who is quite extraordinary in how she is, but she wants to be ordinary.
The book is written from the perspective of, or by, the main protagonist as a much older woman looking back and reliving her teenage years, but also her childhood in many ways with great precision. Are you one of those people who take memorabilia seriously, or do you throw things away?
Oh, I'm a little bit of both. I am really happy to throw stuff away that I'm only kind of vaguely attached to. In some ways I'm quite minimalist, but then sometimes there are things that just, objects or ephemera or whatever that really move me, and I absolutely have to keep. So my dad died last year, and for I've forgotten how long, but something like 40 years, he and I sent the exact same birthday card back and forwards to each other since I was 17. And so it has, all these inscriptions from all those years. And obviously, that means a huge amount to me, especially now that he's gone and it will never be sent back. So there are some things that I will absolutely kind of never get rid of. In fact, I've put it in a double-sided frame and hung it in the loo.
A bit of both, but there are things that you will never let go of that remain meaningful to you. I'm exactly the same. I find it very difficult to get rid of things that still connect me with the past, and I find it important to hold on to them. But I know that there's a theory that you must not. But I think authors, artists, well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because on one hand, these things can inspire you to think about stories and to go deep into something. But on the other hand, they can also tie you down and overwhelm you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they can, which is why I'm, not a person of kind of clutter. I don't have so much that I'm overwhelmed by it. I think the pieces that I keep are very choice pieces that definitely mean a lot. And I think if I kind of imagine them gone, I would feel some devastation. So they have to mean that much to me. Otherwise, they can just go. It's fine.
How do you feel about finding things that are? So, for example, I found, love letters between my parents or letters between my parents where I feel, of course, if they were alive, it would be completely private. But now it's not, because it's in my possession, and I feel a little bit funny about reading those things, but I find it really important to read them. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything like that from way back from someone else that I know. But in Hunger and Thirst, there's one of the characters who isn't really in the book sends postcards to one of the lecturers in the art school, and because Ursula delivers the post, we the reader get to read these postcards, and I bought the postcards so the images of actual postcards that I own, and I can see one of them sitting up here with two men from, I don't know, maybe the 1920s with a bear between them. The back is blank, so I could make up anything, but kind of owning these, actually, while the book is still kind of fresh in my mind and I'm talking about it a lot, mean a lot to me, actually. So much so that I've stuck them up on the wall. I love those things. And actually, kind of thinking about this more, sometimes I will buy whole photo albums off eBay from random people that I obviously don't know, but they are family photograph albums. It feels like I'm saving something, but also I use them as writing prompts, these old photographs. But then I'm also quite ruthless in that I'll go through the albums and discard any photos that don't mean anything to me and don't move me, don't touch me in some way, and just keep those that do.
That's really interesting.
I am a bit of a combination.
That's really interesting. I feel that's a really meaningful kind of contrast, because I had a period when I also kind of bought and collected photo albums of complete strangers from long ago. And I thought, this is cool. This is interesting. These are stories. And then one day, they kind of made me almost physically sick. I felt, well, this is quite interesting, actually. W.G. Sebald's books, they have, for example, in particular, the Emigrants, it has photographs in it which are exactly that, random photos that he collected from God knows where. And I had an event with him. We were sitting in the green room, and I said, these photo albums of strangers, I feel like I'm surrounding myself with ghosts, and I can't take it anymore. It makes me feel very odd. And he said, this is a sentence that I'll never forget, because he was obsessed with those ideas. He said, in death, we are all together. And I think this is something he meant very seriously, that there are no other people's ghosts and our own. It all kind of is one world. And, I'm still thinking about what that could possibly mean. And let's apply that actually to this novel, in which someone dies violently, but doesn't quite. I'm very curious about why you needed the horror element as a novelist. What did it add for you to the story? Why was it necessary?
Well, I kind of almost set out knowing I wanted to write a novel with something really scary in it. We can call it horror. I'm really happy to call it horror, or it could be supernatural suspense or psychological whatever. But all my novels, as you kind of suggested, have some darkness in them. It's just this is so far the darkest, because it does have some scenes that can be regarded as horror with some of the tropes of horror from film and from novels. And you're right, repeating elements electrical items going wrong, the sound of flies being eaten, flies being swallowed, all sorts of horrible things. But I can remember when I first set out, I thought, I wonder if I can write a novel that just has a very small, scary scene. You know, in the way that you can write a literary novel that might have a sex scene in it, but then your novel is not erotica. You've written a literary novel with a sex scene. So I was kind of playing around with that at the very beginning. Could I just have one scene that just kind of takes us out of it, the reader out, and kind of flips everything and then goes back into the normal story? And actually that just did not work. It was quite interesting how that didn't work, because you know, I was setting out to try and scare someone with that scene, to scare a reader. But unlike having a sex scene where it can just suddenly happen, I think with horror or something scary, you need all that build-up. You need all the foreshadowing. You need the dread, the feeling that something is coming. Otherwise, that scene just doesn't work. It just comes out of the blue and it's not scary and it's just weird. And I didn't want weird. So I played up on the horror, I guess.
You did it so interestingly because Sue is an aspiring director from a very young age of horror films, which she wants to create from a female perspective. She's convinced that this genre is male-dominated. And I think the novel is to a great degree about what women are or should be or can be afraid of in their lives. Again, not giving anything away, but there are brilliant connections there, you know, through generations of women where the same experience of a violent act has repercussions forever. So we have a trio of main characters. We have Ursula, her friend Sue, and Vince, who they all work with, and Sue and Vince are a sort of couple. They move, Vince and Ursula, who's basically homeless at 16, they move into a house which is a former crime scene where a family was found murdered or killed, or some kind of unspeakable horror took place there. And it's been standing empty in exactly the same shape and with all the belongings still there. That made me think of how brilliantly you write about how none of us live in a vacuum. Wherever we are in our lives, we are included or occupying the spaces of others who've been there before us, who are there simultaneously, who may come after us, because we will leave traces. Is that a theme you were consciously pursuing, or?
Yes, but not necessarily thinking about it with regards to my life. But you're absolutely right. And I live in a converted chapel, so it couldn't kind of get much more, you know, history in the place that I live. The room I'm in is above the Sunday school. You know, there's still a place where the altar was. There's still loads of the stained glass windows. And although there was nobody buried in the garden because it was a Methodist chapel, they were buried somewhere else, the whole place is absolutely full of who went before and also, yeah, who will come after. I've had this desk made after my dad died, and as a kind of almost memorial to him, and I put a little note to say who is it dedicated to. So whoever comes here next will will have all that. So it wasn't that I was thinking about myself, but it's quite interesting that you raised that. But it absolutely was about who's gone before and what they leave behind, what we all leave behind. Because I lived in that house that's in the novel. So the house in the novel is a bungalow, and I squatted in a bungalow in 1989 where all the previous owners' stuff was still there. So he had left and gone to Australia and decided never to come back, and he just never took any of his belongings with him. So we lived amongst it, and it was thinking about that feeling and how what it's like to have someone's stuff all around you. And Ursula feels very restricted by it and scared that this man might come back, and she's always moving things back into place. And after she leaves, the house is bulldozed, and the house was bulldozed, the house we left. And, you know, you were just asking about ephemera and the things we keep. So I took some things from that house that I still have. I have a slotted spoon of all the things you could take. That's what I took from this house. So it was a really interesting place to think back on and write about.
What part of your life did you live in that house in 1989? Were you a student?
I just finished art school, so it was the summer after I finished art school. Yeah.
But it wasn't a crime scene.
No, that was all invented. No.
But did you already then think this is something that I might write about or do something with?
No, not at all, because it never occurred to me that I was going to be a writer. Not at that stage. You know, I was 21, 22, something like that. So it was a long time ago, and I had no plans to write any novels at that stage. But I guess I was still looking at the world in the way that you described. And so it was relatively easy to go back into that space in my head and remember it all and what it felt like to live there.
So that space in your head, going back to that, looking at the world as an artist, as a sculptor, and as a novelist, as a writer, what is the difference for you?
I guess the most obvious difference is that I was a sculptor who carved in stone and in wood. So you're always given, or you go and find the piece of stone and the piece of wood, and then you work on it. And you're chiseling away and refining. But a novel, there is nothing. You know, there's nothing on the page. It's only when you come to edit that you can then start playing. But you've got to kind of create the piece of stone and the piece of wood in the first place. So that, I think that's the biggest difference. But, you know, since it's the first time I've written about a sculptor, I have perhaps been thinking more about the similarities. There are so many that I would not have thought of in the way that I think about a novel, you know, when I've written a first draft, and how everything connects to each other, and you remove one thing and everything kind of falls apart or changes, which is a very 3D way of looking at a piece of art, a piece of work, in the way that I would look at a sculpture, and you could look at it kind of side on and see how this piece on the right related to that on the left and turn it round. And if you took something off, then something else had to change. Very similar.
So when Ursula describes her feeling, her sense of being in what she defines as flow, when she's overcome with this need to create, to carve from wood in her case, or to draw, to draw people, she kind of gets into it and she can't stop. Is that the same kind of flow that you experience as a novelist?
I think it's meant to be the same, and I know some novelists do experience that, but that state is very, very rare for me as a writer. Sometimes I can get into it more when I'm editing, but I find it hard to find the flow space when I'm writing the first draft. I find that really difficult and slow and a very, very laborious process. It's like I am building that block of stone one grain at a time, and it's just not much fun. Sometimes the flow will come, and it's about really turning off the kind of conscious brain and tapping into my subconscious and just writing without that voice saying this isn't any good, what, nobody's going to want to read this. I find that very hard to switch that voice off.
So did you really surprise yourself when you became a novelist at 40, I think it was?
Yeah, it was. I had no plans at all. I kind of fell by mistake into writing some short stories because I signed up to do a short story slam in my local library. Because I was looking for art projects, I hadn't any inclination to be a writer. But after I'd written several short stories, I thought, oh, I'll do an MA in creative writing, without knowing at all how a novel was written or got published, no idea at all. But I wrote Our Endless Numbered Days on that MA course, and then I got an agent and Penguin bought it. So I am still amazed. 6 books later, I am still amazed.
You kind of give away in your novel that the town they live in initially, before she moves to London, is Winchester. You give it away by placing a certain sculpture that is in London, but also in Winchester. You don't name Winchester, but it's easily identifiable by the name of the sculptor and the sculpture itself, the horse with the naked rider. So is Winchester a great source of inspiration to you, a great place to write, or also to have studied writing?
Well, it's the first time I've used Winchester in a novel. Yeah. And there wasn't any kind of, right, now it's time to write about Winchester. And I'm kind of, don't have any problem in declaring that it's Winchester. Mm-hmm. It's only that I mess around with some of the streets. So you couldn't actually walk from one place to another that I might describe in the novel, because I do it I change things for the sake of the novel. And also that bungalow that we talked about had a very particular name. And when it was bulldozed, a new house was built in its place with the same name, which is not the name in the novel. So I felt like I want to kind of blur all this a little bit. I mean, it was a very kind of creative way for me to, like I said, go back to the bungalow, but also go back to the art school and remember that. It wasn't so much the places, but tapping into my memories was actually in some ways much easier than inventing everything like I have done in the other novels.
The three sort of main characters are Ursula and Sue and Vince. And Vince is such a mystery and such an interesting character to me. And I just wanted to quote something on page 108. So young Ursula and young Vince are talking, and she says, I tried to catch his eye to stop him from speaking for his own good, and because this wasn't what people like us did, talk about our histories. I find that her awareness of her connection with this very dangerous, strange, kind of almost mysterious, scary character gives a lot away at that early point in the novel. Do you agree with that? Mm. In a good way. It's very intriguing, because when she says people like us, what does she mean?
Well, to me, when she says people like us, she's talking about their backgrounding in care and in foster homes. So that's the connection, rather than there are some kind of scary connections that come later. And, I wasn't brought up in care, didn't live in any foster homes, have not had any history of that. But I did a lot of research and spoke to a lot of people about it. And one of the things that came up over and over again was that children who were brought up in care, who are adults now, don't really reveal their histories very much at all. It's something that, they shouldn't be ashamed of, but often they are, or they're made to feel ashamed of. So they don't release that information very readily. So to me, that's what that line means.
I had a hope, a narrative hope. For how when we read anything to do with mystery and crime and sort of detective stuff, you always try to guess and to outguess the author. So my hope was, in that sense, was that Vince would turn out to be the child that had survived the situation that occurred at the bungalow. Because Ursula at one point was convinced that the child survived, that the parents died, but the child survived. And it wasn't till much later that she learned the truth. But I thought, wow, that would be such a cool way of...
but also such a massive coincidence.
Yes.
I kind of think somebody said this once about writing, that you can have coincidences to create a problem, but if you have them as the solution, they never seem believable. So I think that might have just been, I think lots of people might have gone, well, how did they manage to meet? That's just too weird.
But, there is a beautiful sense of the 80s, very authentically, written, presented in your book. And I wonder, did you have to kind of re-research that, or is that all from memory?
It was, I think, mostly from memory. I probably was looking out novels set in the 80s, but I can't remember any kind of.
I love, for example, the phone calls from the phone box, not being able to make a phone call from anywhere else if you didn't have a phone at home, and how it smelled, the smell of it.
Smelly, so smelly. I really remember that, and how they're always so grubby, phone boxes. Oh. Yeah. It was just really taking myself back there.
Yeah. Claire, you do a lot for other writers. You write about other authors and new books on your Substack and on your Instagram. You present a lot. What makes you do that? Why are you so passionate about other writers' work?
It's a love of books. It's just because I love reading, and why would you not want to share those books with other people and encourage them to read them if you've loved them? And that helping other authors is a very lovely byproduct. It
Absolutely.
is just all about the books for me. And on Instagram in particular, I then follow various people who post about books, and I learned that, certain people have similar tastes to me, so it's a great way of finding books.
Mm-hmm.
I save so many posts on Instagram because people have recommended books. Hundreds and hundreds of them now saved that I'll never actually get through, but it's just a great way of discovering
but I can highly recommend your Substack, where you write about the books, and you also do video on your Instagram when you talk about them. It's really, I think people should definitely connect with that, and they will learn a lot about very interesting current books. Are you always doing current books, or do you sometimes do older books?
Sometimes I do older ones, but not kind of classics. I guess they're kind of, I might dig into someone's backlist because I've liked what they've written most recently. So yeah, sometimes older ones.
I have a final question for you, which is one that we ask all of our authors. Why do you write?
That's such an interesting question, given that I am writing about a sculptor, because I write to make something. So I think if my books ever were only ebooks, I can't imagine being satisfied with that. I love the physical copy. It's the physical book. It's about having made something, and then the idea that I have invented stuff in my head. It's gone on the page. It's gone across the world, and someone else has read it, and now it's in their head. That is just still extraordinary to me. It's like a kind of telepathy, and I love that idea too. I feel very privileged that I'm able to do that and people do read my books.
Claire Fuller, thank you so much for joining us on Shop Talk with Writers.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are listening to Shop Talk with Writers. Our guest today was novelist Claire Fuller. Her new novel, Hunger and Thirst, is published by Fig Tree, an imprint of Penguin Books. Claire Fuller also has an excellent Substack where she very generously recommends books by other authors. So when you receive our Substack newsletter about this episode, you can go ahead and explore more of Claire Fuller's writing on her Substack. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, where we share great clips, reels, and background stories from our episodes. Coming up on Shop Talk with Writers, Stephanie Sikia, William Boyd, and more. I'm Elena Lappin. Thank you for listening.